Hello YouTube, I am Alex, otherwise known as Lexi. I go by MaskedSwan on the internet. Riftbound bans have become the hot topic. Is Cool Shot really broken? Is a stack deck potentially worth banning in altogether? Maybe we should just get rid of Ezreal. And so many other questions are being asked within the Riftbound community. And I want to give my 2 cents as someone that has been around the TCG industry and playing as a competitor for over 2 decades. And Riftbound is a game I love and appreciate so much. I did play in Bologna in the main event. I didn't do very well, but I'm having so much fun streaming over on my Twitch channel as well as just playing the game at a local level. So let's dive into why Riftbound has a ban list and why there are some asking for bans. But before we do, why do bans matter? So bans in TCG are actually meant to kind of like catch those mistakes that went overlooked in R&D and playtesting. It can also happen, and I think this partly was showcased and leaked, within Riftbound. Draven was not meant to draw infinite cards, and because of this, we start to see, right before printing, cards get very slightly altered, and that changes the power level in a highly unexpected way. This could also be a card, because of its rarity, gets completely overlooked in play and design, and then suddenly, when it hits the actual live game, people find the card and they break it, because every card is tested by the average player. Can't always be done in a much wider team. Also, because obviously this is a physical game and not a digital game, bans or restrictions can actually allow the balance team to prevent unfun play environments, as opposed to being able to errata text. You can't really do that with a physical one. You can very slightly alter the idea of the wording, but it still has to basically mean the exact same thing. Can't necessarily actually do that in a physical TCG. So, do bans need to happen? Are there other options? Well, in times when a meta becomes really polarized by one deck, like there is just the deck you should play and everything else, and it's the best deck, yeah, that's typically a reason, especially if there is a core piece, like 1 to 2 cards that really bridge and glue the deck together. If you ban one of those cards and suddenly the deck doesn't really exist anymore, or it becomes a much worse version of it, that can be a reason for a ban. Sometimes you can also experience there is a, quote, best deck, but the only good counter to that deck can only really be proficiently played by highly skilled players, means that also only top tier players and pro players can actually play it, which kind of also has a negative feedback loop for casuals and even semi-competitive players, because guess what? They're still struggling and not playing the counter correctly. Which then becomes the thing where you just don't really want to play the counter, so you just stick to playing the best deck, and then it becomes a very unhealthy play environment, because it also means you can't play anything else at a local level. So banning cards outright can kill the card game, the card for everybody, and also sometimes tends to kill the whole strategy. So an alternative way, and a game that has done this to big success, is Yu-Gi-Oh! Restricting it, meaning you can only play 1, 2, or 3, 1 to 2 cards in the game. For Riftbound's case, would mean something like Cool Shot could be only played 1, which would definitely mean the consistency factor that the card offers would be lower, but you could still play the card and you wouldn't lose the inherent value. You could also see this with potentially very expensive cards. If you minimized it just down to 1, you wouldn't see the card so often, but when you do see it, it has that wow factor. Additional formats also sometimes in other card games allow that. It's not really relevant for Riftbound at this moment in time, but I just wanted to make sure it is a point, and that is something that potential other card games do use to kind of at least relieve some of the pain and stress for a player when a card does get banned. They are still have an opportunity and an option to play the card. So, do we need bans? Now, Challenger TCG, I love the Challenger TCG guys, they have a great metafy. They posted this image, and I'll be partly basing my thoughts. So, let's just go over this very quickly. They're saying we must ban Cool Shot. Should bans include Rebuke, Fight or Flight, Stellarcorn, and Reaver's Row? And a card that's at least on the radar is going to be Dazzling Aurora. Jeff Jones, who is one of the greatest Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, and he's also a man that got best of Lee Sin at Houston, because he's just the GOAT, I guess, tweeted out this image a little bit beforehand, and said they need to ban Stacked Deck, Obelisk of Power, and Reaver's Row. My face is in front of Reaver's Row, but I promise you, it is there. So, why would why would competitive players call for a ban? And especially these bans at this moment in time. And this is some of the arguments, but not a culmination of all. The current power level of some of these cards is significantly above and has now warped the metagame. is having a knock-on effect towards local players and casual players, and that the game is still young. However, competitive players are losing interest, especially after Set 1's meta being pretty much play Kai'Sa, play Yi, play Annie, play Set, which sounds very healthy, but realistically it was play Kai'Sa or kind of bust, or play Annie and kind of bust. The meta now, jumping into Set 2, has very much play purple or don't bother. Realistically, it's play Miracle Draven or play Ezreal. And that's kind of it at this moment in time. Not that there aren't plenty of other decks to play, but that's kind of the general meta we're experiencing at the moment, at the highest of tiers. And remember, bans typically are really yelled by those from the highest tier. Casual players don't really understand or play the game correctly or to proficient levels, which means they won't see the same reason for a ban. They might just feel bad about some of the play patterns that happen against them. So, reasons against it I've also seen is that it's still very, very, very early days. We're only in Set 2, and we should wait for more sets to come in. We didn't ban Kai'Sa, so why are we going to ban something now? We also don't want to confuse new card game players with a negative experience of buying cards and then being told they're not allowed to play with those cards, especially at local level, especially as Riftbound is a lot of players' first card games. Banning something this early into the game's life cycle means you've now set a precedent for what it means to actually ban, for a ban also to happen, which will then very much reinforce in the community's mind, if you're banning for this reason, you're going to have to ban other cards in the future for that same reason. So rather not banning something at this moment in time actually prevents that. And that none of these cards, outside of maybe Dazzling Aurora, actually win the game outright. Like, none of them go bang, win the game. Some of them feel like they have that effect, but they don't have written win the game. Especially something like Reaver's Row, where your opponent is also allowed to go on that battlefield. It's just how it interacts. So, my thoughts. How do I think about this? And where does my philosophy on bannings actually come? So, I'm not a fan of banning cards outright. I actually would rather metas and sideboarding really evolve in time. And the more people actually play within these, you already see things evolve. We already saw this from China, right? Mid-range Draven was seen as the quote-unquote best deck. We then saw Miracle evolve, and then that became thought of as the best deck. Well, then we saw Alan come along with Control Ezreal. Everyone's like, I think that's actually the best deck. Evolution is a very natural progression of cards. And while it makes sense to ban some cards, it's not always the reason to ban cards early on. This isn't, and to use Magic the Gathering as that's the game I am most familiar with, we're not in Oko territory. If you know Oko, you know how warped the format became around that. We're not in that environment, and I don't think anything at the moment is that kind of meta warping, you play this or you don't. If you're not playing it, you have to be playing just the hyper-aggressive aggro deck that can hopefully go under and maybe has a 40% into the match. But at least it's 40, and that's better than everything else. If we had players can only cast like one spell or unit per turn, I think that would also kind of put us in a far less, oh my god, it feels like your opponents are just doing everything at the moment. But I also don't even know if that card would even be balanced at this moment. And in my opinion, decks are also far more enabled by Ezreal, and in part by Vex now. Vex is seeing a lot of play in these kind of Miracle and controlling decks. Simply being, Cold Shot is perfectly balanced when you're actually paying for it with the runes, or if you happen to find all your seals. Ezreal just gives you a free roll. So I actually argue, I think Ezreal's far more of the problem card. The problem is you don't want to ban Ezreal because it's one of the few money cards in the whole set. So Ezreal also lets it cycle itself, so you're not even down on card advantage if your opponent actually interacts and kills your Ezreal at your base. It still means he's traded himself and another card. He's always net neutral. Even if you play one Cold Shot, you're probably mega positive, and if your opponent still kills it, you're like, sure, I've already gained like 3, 4, 5 cards off of just this one Ezreal, let alone the fact of if you get to play a second one and completely blow away. So, Red Kai'Sa, in my opinion, is one of the few other cards that kind of always gets net neutral, assuming you play it at a board state and your opponents aren't able to kill it. Main reason is when you play Kai'Sa, typically you will always conquer with her, meaning you're always going to draw a card, which means quantity of cards, you will always go up in card advantage. Cool Shot's also most blatant part is that it costs 0. Like, I think we can all understand this is why the card is so powerful. So perhaps it would be a bit more balanced if it's you could have the first version of it be 0 and 1 power, but its repeat cost should have probably been 1. Now, it's far too late to actually do that in hindsight, but if you're able to get something like a Vex and something, you're really having to work for it. The fact that it's just kind of a win does really make it feel bad, and I just don't like that we're there. It's the other factor of that Cool Shot lets you look at 4 cards, and only for 1 power with Ezreal, or really 0 if you have a Vex out as well. This is also obviously assuming that you're doing the repeat, but plain and simply put, Cool Shot is probably the most broken card, and I completely understand why people are calling for a ban. I just think Cool Shot is far more enabled by Ezreal, and not actually the fact that Cool Shot itself is explicitly broken. Now, it is because it's a 0-cost spell, and 0-cost spells in so many other games, especially where there are costs within them, are typically broken. I'm just looking at the whole Phyrexian cycle from Magic the Gathering. Most of those cards were extremely broken, especially if you start putting draw a card into any of them. Cool Shot is obviously enabled Miracle. Something like Nocturne gets even more stupid, but the whole package as well is just very, very powerful. So, Cool Shot has some validity as to be banned. Kai'Sa is fine. This is far more of a comparison to Ezreal. I just really like Kai'Sa, and I think she is far more balanced inherently. It's actually the legend ability of Kai'Sa, which yeah. Let's talk about Rebuke and Fight or Flight. And I actually think these two cards are far more victims of the fact that purple is the best color. And I don't think anyone would ever argue this factor. With set 1 and set 2, set 1, purple cards were pretty good. Some of them even really good, especially in decks like Annie. But purple wasn't the outright best color. It was arguably maybe blue or maybe red, depending on where you fall down there. I think it was blue personally, but that's not for this conversation. Purple is far more of the symptom that, let's be real, if you're playing Cool Shot, stack deck, purple Ezreal, these cards kind of slot into these decks. Now, not all of them are always 2-ofs or 3-ofs, and this is why I don't think these cards need to be banned at this moment. I also think at this moment in time, we will see that these cards will get power creeped out. Like, these are powerful effects, but this one does cost, Rebuke does cost 2 runes. Whereas Fight or Flight is just arguably powerful, but in set 1, when you played this in something like a Teemo, it was just pretty good. But you didn't outright win the game with these cards. They were just solid. So, I don't like banning supportive cards, unless they are absolutely throwing the support is just insane. They're just more victims of the symptom that purple is. So let's go over to Stellarcorn Herder, who is, more than anything, unparalleled when it comes to drawing. Nothing quite draws as many cards, especially in Aurelia and Yasuo, because it must be said, than Stellarcorn Herder. But Stellarcorn Herder herself isn't actually a broken card. It's far more of a fact that, one, she's played in typically purple, or with purple, which, as we've already established, is playing some very powerful cards. And you could argue that Stellarcorn Herder is made broken by Rebuke and Fight or Flight being able to move her around. However, my counterpoint to that would be, well, actually, I think Guardian Angel and Zhonya's giving so much protection to Stellarcorn Herder is far more of a bigger problem than actually the fact that Stellarcorn Herder herself is broken, and also the fact that, in actuality, the purple stuff just lets her move around to draw more cards, or rather, cycling the card you play to give her protection, which means you'll never net down on card advantage. Stellarcorn Herder just gives you card advantage, especially if you're able to give her some protection. I'll also argue the fact that I think a lot of people want Stellarcorn Herder gone, because at this moment in time, Aurelia is a very strong deck within the format. Arguably, it's the 3rd best deck in the format. But if you ban Stellarcorn Herder, does Aurelia kind of become fully all in on Protect the President, and if you don't get there in the first few cards, you kind of lose? I don't necessarily think that actually breeds a healthy game environment. I actually think Stellarcorn Herder, while sometimes it feels like they have all the answers, sometimes if they don't have the runes to do the answers, it doesn't actually matter. Just depends on the game state. I would argue that the most powerful card in the format at this moment in time is Stacked Deck. To use a Magic the Gathering analogy, it's Ponder, it's Preordain, it's Brainstorm. It's one of these many one-cost with zero drawback spells in the game where you get to draw a card and the rest goes away. Now, if it was put into its discard, the card would be even more broken. And I stress this very heavily. The fact that it recycles is pretty good. Problem is, in conjunction with Called Shot, it's very easy to get the exact answer that you need at this exact moment in time, and you'll probably cycle through your whole deck if you're playing something like Ezreal or some of these Miracle decks, which in turn feels like you get to play these cards over and over again, which means you cycle through everything, which kind of gives a negative loop, because then it's suddenly, with cards like Fizz, you can just keep going forever and ever and ever. You then play Last Rites, you get them back into your deck, and the cycle continues. Stacked Deck is also incredibly powerful because you can play it in mid-range. You can kind of play it in aggro. I play it in aggro Annie because it's one of those cards that can just fix your hand. But it also offers mid-range Draven one of the most powerful on-the-draw plays in turn 1 by playing a Stacked Deck into a Noxus Hopeful. Something that Kai'Sa has to work a lot harder to do when playing Noxus Hopeful, whereas Purple just kind of gets to get card quality, not quantity, so no advantage, but also while improving their hand, gets to play a powerful unit. Stacked Deck, in my opinion, is probably the card that really should be on the ban hammer, if more than anything else. There isn't a reason not to play it in Purple. Obelisk of Power and Reaver's Rose are arguably one of the most powerful battlefields at the moment, and Obelisk of Power is, well, it just lets you skip a turn cycle. If you're ramping, you want to play Obelisk of Power and to keep going. One of the few cards that is enabling Aurora. The problem is, certain aggro and control decks, some mid-range and control decks are also benefiting from the idea of cheating early on, when the control decks, when the ramping decks would absolutely like to kind of have nobody doing anything, or maybe playing just one low-cost unit. The fact that they're also skipping this kind of prevents the ramping deck from getting the time where they needed to hopefully ramp themselves. So Obelisk of Power kind of warps the game because everything is a little bit further ahead than it should be. The idea that mid-range Draven gets to play something turn 1, and it's like a double Noxus Hopeful plus a 2-drop for 6 might without even really working very hard, pretty egregious. The fact that Control Ezreal gets to benefit from this as well, the fact that Aurelia benefits from it. There are so many things that Obelisk of Power enables, which you would feel like it should only really be wanted to be played in Aurora. The fact that it's played in so many other decks brings problems. Now, Reaver's Row is arguably the Draven battlefield at the moment, and Draven gets all the benefits with none of the downsides, simply through the fact that outside of Aurelia being able to trigger it, it's kind of whatever. Draven will obviously push people off, bounce back, and unless it's in the mirror match, just get raw advantage. And it's their best one on the play, and if you're on the draw in the mirror, you just play it when you're on the play. And if you win 2-0, don't worry about it. You didn't even have to do the mirror match. Reaver's Row is a fantastic battlefield for Draven, but it's not the same for anybody else. And God forbid you're a Leona who wants to actually attack in with yellow Leona and people are jumping away. Makes that whole strategy absolutely unplayable, which Battlefield shouldn't nullify Legends entirely. It should just be like it's a net zero. You don't gain anything, you don't lose anything. But Reaver's Row kills stun in general. So, do we ban, ladies and gentlemen? My opinion is we need to let things go out, but what's your opinion? Let me know in the comment section down below. Like, comment, and subscribe. All that good stuff. Or do we let it ride? But with that all said, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. And by the way, I do stream live on Twitch. So, if you want to join my Twitch chat, that'd be lovely and appreciated. But with that all said, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you all very, very soon.